probably, and looks like it's going to be good. But
Yeah,
that's how quick weather can change. 1 minute it's
yeah,
stormy, and next day it's beautiful and clear.
yeah. It was supposed to be good. Oh, somebody else. Hey, Amara. I know that name.
Hi, sorry, I'm trying to start my video.
Oh, no, you're good. You're totally good. All right, it is 5:30. So I'll slowly start getting into this. I know I'm sure some people maybe will trickle in a little bit later, but so hi Amara. I know you know me and I know you. Hi Jamie. And hi Sky. I don't think I've met you. Nice to meet you.
Hi. No, I haven't been on this yet, but I just happened to have a free evening and I was like, I would love to join this.
Oh, good, 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 good. No, I'm glad. Well,
Yeah.
I'm Megan. I'm the Chief Pilot Girls of the Fly, and I'm very excited to talk about law with you guys today.
Yeah.
I'll try to make it not dry because I know talking about regulations can be pretty cutthroat as they are written by lawyers, so it's not the most exciting language. But we'll get into it. We'll get into why you should care as a pilot. So we're talking about the federal aviation regulations today, specifically Part 91 and also NTSB, National Transportation Safety Board. And we're just reviewing the regulatory framework that kind of dictates how we operate under Part 91. And if you're not super familiar with the federal aviation regulations, they're split into different parts depending on what kind of flight operation you're doing. So right now, we're in general aviation, so that'll be Part 91. Airliners are Part 121, charters are mostly Part 135, and so on and so forth. So there's just different parts. So we're Part 91 for flight training, and we'll just be reviewing different FARs that I would like to point out specifically for private pilots, and also the purpose of the National Transportation Safety Board and just kind of what goes into investigations. And this stuff is really good for anyone who's just starting out as student pilots, or if you're preparing for your check ride. And I want to emphasize, like, you don't have to memorize verbatim per se each regulation, but you need to know where to find the information. So we'll kind of get into that. So for reading the FAR AIM, if you're not familiar, it's a giant book, and it's the Federal Aviation Regulations and the Aeronautical Information Manual. So the difference between the two is the regulations, those are the law, those are written in blood, and a lot of those regulations actually came to be due to like some sort of accident or incident that occurred in the past. So then we created a regulation to hopefully prevent that from happening again. I believe the 1,500 rule for getting your ATP, that was the result of a crash that happened about 16 years ago. Just as an example. And then the Aeronautical Information Manual is just published for like giving guidance and advice and like best practices for certain aviation procedures, operational requirements, and best practices for pilots that are flying in the national airspace system. So it's a non-regulatory document, which means it just doesn't carry like the force of the law like the federal aviation regulations do, but it is an authoritative resource. And to put it bluntly, like it can be technically used against you in the court of law if anything, if you ever found, which I'm sure you won't, if you ever found yourself though, like in a case against the FAA and because you broke a regulation, or actually because maybe you did something questionable and that was unsafe, they can refer to the AIM and be like, hey, well, why didn't you follow this guidance? Why didn't you follow this best practice that we published to prevent this kind of thing from happening? So it can still be used against you. That's why it's there. And the AIM is split into chapters. So there's like air traffic control procedures, airspace, weather, airport lighting, just different chapters that you can review. And while Part 91 and the FAR outline the legal requirements, the AIM just provides like detailed explanations and best practices. It's just another good resource. Something kind of similar to the AIM that the FAA also publishes that I won't get too deeply into are advisory circulars, and those are documents that they're also published by the FAA. They're published online, and they just provide extra guidance on topics that are not covered in the AIM. So one that I refer to a lot is Advisory Circular 90-66 Charlie, and that refers to operations in non-towered airports. So there was just a lot of confusion on how pilots should enter and leave traffic patterns, how we should operate in traffic patterns without a control tower. And there wasn't really anything in the AIM specifying what to do. So they published the advisory circular, and now it gets updated every so often. It was 9066 Alpha, 9066 Brava. Right now it's 9066 Charlie. So all the advisory circulars get updated like that. And they just have different topics. There's another one that's like a pre-flight or a pre-flight guide to weather briefing. So there's just different topics that maybe are not covered in the AIM that would be covered in the advisory circulars. Any questions? Okay. And then just as also kind of like a quick note, Part 91 is, again, are the rules that we operate under in general aviation. You may have noticed though, like flight schools are under Part 61 or Part 141. I like to say that Part 61 and Part 141 are how you get your certificate, and Part 91 is how you would get it taken away. So Part 61 and 141, they just offer like different training outlines and aeronautical experience requirements for getting your certificates, whereas Part 91 is actually the general operating rules once you get that certificate. So Part 61 students and Part 141 students, we are all held to the Part 91 regulations, if that makes sense. Okay, so here are some regulations that I think are important to know when you're kind of in your early training, but also will definitely come up in your check ride. Maybe not all of them, but there's a good chance that all of them will. So 91.3 is the first one, and that is determining the pilot and command final authority and responsibility. So the whole PIC mindset is it's just talking about like you're directly responsible for your aircraft, flying your plane. Air traffic control cannot fly it for you. Other pilots cannot fly it for you. You are the final authority of your airplane. And it also lays out emergency authority, basically saying, you know, if you need to deviate from any rule for safety and to respond to this emergency, then you can do so. You'll most likely have to report that deviation utilizing your emergency authority, but it is there for you to utilize because you are the final authority of your aircraft. You are the pilot in command. And your first job is to fly the airplane. All right, 91.7 is just talking about aircraft airworthiness. And I want to make an important note that it's up to the owner operator to maintain airworthiness of an airplane, but it is up to the PIC to determine if that plane is airworthy through your pre-flighting. So making sure that it had all of its required maintenance done, inspections done, and to discontinue the flight if there's any unairworthy quality about that plane. And the 91.13, I kind of call this like a catch-all regulation. So it specifies that you can't act in a careless or reckless manner that could endanger the lives of other people. And ultimately, if there's something that you do and you get reported to the FAA from somebody, maybe you didn't break an actual written regulation, but the FAA can absolutely use 91.13 to, I don't know, prosecute you, because they can argue. It's pretty easy to argue if your act was careless or reckless. So that's why it's kind of a catch-all. So you might come across a situation and you're like, well, I'm not breaking any laws or any regulations, but that can always be the defining factor. Is if it was careless or reckless, then it's game over. 91.17 talks about alcohol and drugs, and you guys will probably hear the whole 8 hours bottle and throttle thing. And I mean, there's like a little bit of truth to it, but I think it oversimplifies the whole thing. So it actually says that you can't perform a required crew member duty. It's not talking about, oh, you take a drink and then 8 hours later you turn the key for the plane. It's 8 hours ago you had a drink and now you're pre-flighting. Now you're checking the weather. Now you're planning your route. Those are all required crew member duties. So it's not just getting in the plane, it's whenever you start kind of like your pre-flight process. And then also they talk about no higher blood alcohol content of no higher than 0.04%. So even if you had a drink 9 hours ago, but your blood alcohol content is 0.005%, still can't go or still can't perform a required crew member duty. And you're the pilot, so you're the required crew member. 91-103 talks about pre-flight action. There's another acronym that you will hear about is Northwest Craft, so NW Craft, craft with a K. So it'll talk about, a lot of people think that this is an IFR only regulation because it says something like before any IFR flight, but it also says before any IFR flight or any flight outside the vicinity of your airport. So if you're taking off out of McClellan, like a Girls with the Fly, and you go to Lincoln, that's outside the vicinity of your airport. So you need to be familiar with all the elements of 91-103, which talks about the NOTAMs, the weather, fuel requirements, runway lengths, takeoff and landing distances. You have to be familiar with that for both airports. 91-13 talks about right-of-way rules. I won't get too deeply into it, but just know that if the less maneuverable of like the aircraft or the glider or whatever, the less maneuverable it is, more likely it has the right of way over you. So for example, like a hot air balloon has right of way over everyone because it's really hard to steer those things. And then it would be a glider because you can steer them a little bit more than a hot air balloon, but not as much as an airplane, for example. Helicopters are at the bottom because they're the most maneuverable. So like an aircraft, an airplane has right of way over a helicopter. But an aircraft in distress has right of way over everybody. So an aircraft's on fire, everybody has to move, including a hot air balloon. Aircraft towing or refueling another aircraft, they also have right of way over other powered aircraft. So like a glider is not powered, so that doesn't count. 91-13 also talks about if you're approaching another aircraft head on and that you both are supposed to turn to the right. So then that way you avoid each other. So knowing the right-of-way rules is relevant, especially I would say like in the traffic pattern, because especially at McClellan, you're in the traffic pattern with all sorts of different traffic, especially helicopters. So kind of understanding who has the right of way to land is important. But the regulation also gets into the fact that even if you have the right of way, that's not an excuse for you to cut someone off. It's not an excuse for you to, be careless or reckless and be like, well, I was here first and I have the right of way. You need to do whatever is the safest thing. And if it means putting away your pride and your ego and letting the helicopter land in front of you and letting them go first, then that's what you do. So it's not an excuse to cut anyone off. 91-119 talks about the minimum safe altitudes. So if you're in a congested area, you need to stay at least 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle within 2,000 feet of you. If you're in a non-congested area, you have to at least stay 500 above the surface. Unless you're over open water, then it's 500 feet away from people, vehicles, vessels, or structures. So going into that, just to know like the lowest that you can go. It also specifies that you need to maintain a safe altitude where an emergency landing could be made if needed during takeoff and landing. And then 91-126 through 131 talks about airspace regulations. So I will leave that up to you to read. Also, I put a reference in here you can also look at AIM Chapter 3.1.4. I think it's section 1, paragraph 4. You can learn more about airspace regulations, specifically like equipment requirements to go into certain airspaces, VFR weather minimums for those airspaces and things like that. And then the last one, 91205, we're talking about required equipment, and it depends on if you're daytime VFR or if you're a nighttime VFR. If you're nighttime VFR, you need the whole, there's a funny acronym, A tomato flames, plus an acronym called FLAPS. So the regulation will list what instruments and equipment that you need. Somebody just a long time ago created an acronym for each, A tomato flames and flaps. So essentially, if any of those items are not working during, if anything of A tomato flames is not working during your daytime VFR flight while you're pre-flighting, then it's an easy decision that you can't go unless that gets fixed. Same thing for nighttime VFR. If you have something in A tomato flames that's not working and or something in flaps that's not working, you cannot go. Again, I will leave that up to you guys to do your research on what each instrument, what each piece of equipment is. And I will be sending this presentation to anybody that would like it, because I do have links in here as well further in the presentation. Any questions though on any of these? All makes sense. You guys heard of A tomato flames before? It's pretty common. It comes up a lot. So yeah, you'll see it. You'll see it. You'll hear about more of it. Same thing with flaps. There's another one. 91205 also encompasses IFR requirements. The acronym for that is grab card. So that's just another same thing. If any of those things are not working, you cannot go. Okay, part 91, there's also some specific weather related regulations for private pilots and for instrument pilots too. So 9155, we're talking about the weather minimums I kind of mentioned earlier. The weather minimums change based on the airspace that you're in. And if you look into it with the airspace minimums, you'll notice that the higher you go, the more restrictive those minimums get. And that's because you need more separation, because up higher are faster aircraft, bigger jets. And you essentially, it's kind of like you need more reaction time. Like if you're popping in and out of clouds, you need more reaction time because all the aircraft up there are moving faster. But you will also notice, like in Class Bravo, for example, Class Bravo has smaller minimums than like Class Echo. And that's because Class Bravo is controlled, and anybody that's in Class Bravo is talking to ATC. So ATC can provide that separation service, so they can kind of shrink the minimums a little bit. When it comes to weather minimums, I would say like Class Golf is the trickiest one because it differs between day and night, and it also differs between how high you are. Just know if you're flying at night, the minimums become higher, which makes sense because nighttime is inherently more dangerous. So they want bigger weather minimums for nighttime. And also, the higher you go with Class Golf, the more restrictive they get because there's more traffic up higher. And then the lower you go with Class Golf becomes kind of like bare minimum that you need. So Class Golf is kind of the trickier one just because it has different levels to it. 91157 talks about special VFR requirements. So special VFR is a tool that private pilots can use. I want to pause when I say that because I'll get into why. So it's a tool that private pilots can use if in the event just the airport is below VFR conditions, but you know that the conditions outside of the airport that you're trying to leave are VFR. You can only do it at a Bravo or a Charlie or a Delta airspace or an Echo airspace that's to the surface, and you have to request it. So if you're trying to depart and the ceilings are less than 1,000 feet and the visibility is maybe 2 miles, you can request from air traffic control for a special VFR clearance to get out of the airport during the daytime. Nighttime, you can also do it, but if you're a private pilot, you have to be instrument rated in order to do the special VFR at nighttime. So that regulation will cover that guideline. That's why I was kind of hesitating to say private pilots can all use it, because you can all use it in the daytime, but not in the nighttime unless you're instrument rated. And then the bottom, 91167, 91185, I just wanted to include it in case anyone here is doing your instrument rating currently or planning to. This kind of covers the different like currency requirements for IFR, alternate requirements, fuel requirements, loss con requirements. There's just certain procedures that you have to follow, and those regulations will outline those for you if you're working on that. All right, we're talking about maintenance and inspections. So 91403 talks about owner operator responsibility for airworthiness, kind of talking about that earlier. It is the owner operator's responsibility to maintain an airworthy aircraft. It's the PIC's responsibility to make sure that that aircraft is airworthy during their pre-flight. So there's a little bit of a shared responsibility there. And then we go into 91409, which talks about required inspections. So every aircraft is required to get an annual every 12 calendar months. And then if you're flying an aircraft for hire, aka for flight instruction, those aircraft have to go through a 100-hour, which is essentially an annual, but we don't call it that, and we do it every 100 hours. And also, the main difference between an annual and a 100-hour, other than the timeline, is that an AMP can conduct 100-hour, and an AMP with an IA, an inspection authorization, can conduct an annual. So if you're an AMP, you can do 100-hour. To do an annual, you have to be an AMP with an IA. 91411 and 91413 talk about pedostatic and transponder checks. Those are both due every 24 calendar months. The pedostatic check is only due for instrument flying, and the transponder check is for both instrument and VFR. And then there's another acronym, because we love acronyms in aviation. Aviate. It's just a way for you to memorize like all of the required inspections. So, and I've seen this acronym written out differently. This is just the version I chose. So A stands for annual / ADs, airworthiness directives. To put it simply, airworthiness directives are kind of like a recall on your car. There are specific models of like Cessna 172s that have to have, the flapjack screw checked every 100 hours or something like that. Don't quote me on that, I could be wrong, but there's just certain components of each model of aircraft that need to be checked during at a certain compliance time. Could be every 100-hour, could be every annual, it could be every time the prop gets overhauled or a cylinder gets overhauled. There's just certain things, specific things to that model that need to be checked. Airworthiness directives is what they're called. And then the V stands for VOR check. Every 30 days, you got to do a VOR check, make sure it's accurate. That's for instrument only. And then the 1 stands for the 100-hour. So anytime you're flying a plane for hire. So if you own your own airplane and you're just flying it around, you don't have to do a 100-hour. That's just for like the flight instruction. And then the other A is for the altimeter / pedostatic check. So every 24 calendar months. T is for transponder, every 24 calendar months. And then the E is for the ELT. There's a whole thing where it talks about when like the battery needs to be replaced, and it's either there's every 12 calendar months, anytime it's used for a cumulative 1 hour, or if over 50% of the battery has been used. So again, I would recommend going through these regulations, highlighting them. And also, I failed to mention in the beginning of this, there's a whole table of contents at the beginning of Part 91 that literally lay out all of the regulations that are part of Part 91 and the topics that they have to do with. So get super familiar with the table of contents, because it'll just make reading this book so much easier. And because if you're referring to it on your check ride, it can be super nerve-wracking, and like suddenly you're so nervous you forget how to read. So knowing where that table of contents is and knowing your way around it and through it, and knowing, I don't want you guys to go to your check ride and then the first time you're opening the book is on the check ride. Make sure you're going through it with your CFI on your own and knowing where to find these regulations. And you can just start off by looking for the regulations that we're talking about today. And then, if you get curious and you want to go through the other ones and your CFI brings up other regulations, know where to find them and know how to refer to them. Also kind of how to read them, because they're written by lawyers. So it can be kind of confusing to go through them. The jargon's kind of, it's definitely not written by, doesn't seem like it's written by pilots. So don't let the first time you open this book be during your check ride, please. And then 91417, we're just talking about maintenance records. Just basically like what records have to be permanent, like what records do you have to keep for the entire life of the airplane. And then there are some records that you only need to keep for a year. So that's where you would find kind of a list of what records you have to be permanent and what records are just temporary. All right, so now we're talking about Part 830, which is all about NTSB and the reporting requirements. So the National Transportation Safety Board, the whole purpose is for them to investigate and determine the probable cause of accidents. And it's not just airplanes that they work with. They also do like trains, for example, like train crashes. And it's the PIC or the operator that has to submit the report depending on the type of operation of flight. I would say like in general aviation, typically it'd be the PIC that would do it because we don't really have operators, at least not like in general aviation. There are Part 91 operations that work for that are like corporate aviation. So I won't dive into that. But for example, like Part 121, they have operators. Part 135 have operators. They're the people behind the scenes that determine if the flight's going to happen or not. So, the operator would submit the report, but kind of where we're at, it would be the PIC, maybe the flight school, but I won't get into that too deeply. So we're talking about immediate notification and when that's required. And I'm going to start this off with saying that there are two types of situations that could happen. You can have an aircraft accident or an aircraft incident. So we're talking about accidents. So that's an occurrence associated with the operation of an aircraft, which takes place between the time any person boards the aircraft with the intention of flight and the time all such persons have disembarked, and in which a person suffers death or serious injury, the aircraft sustains substantial damage. It's important to note that serious injury and substantial damage, they both have their own definitions, which I will go into. And also, the intention of flight is a necessary criteria in order to be determined as an aircraft accident. For example, I'm sure you've all heard of the accident, Flight 5342. That's an accident because there was intention of flight because they were flying. And unfortunately, everyone suffered death. So that would be an aircraft accident. An example of, an example of a horrible situation that would actually not meet the criteria of accident is if someone was taxiing an airplane and ran into somebody with the propeller and they were taxiing to go to the airplane wash rack, not to fly. They were taxiing to go wash the airplane, but they ran into someone with the propeller and that person suffered serious injury. They suffered serious injury, but there was no intention of flying present. So that would be an aircraft incident. It would be one that you'd have to report, but it would not qualify as an accident. So now getting into the definition of serious injury, there's this whole list. And so this is just the criteria in order for an injury to qualify as serious. So you have hospitalization for more than 48 hours, beginning within 7 days from the date the injury occurred. So if you're hospitalized for 24 hours within 7 days, doesn't count. Or if you're hospitalized for more than 48 hours, but 8 days after the date the injury occurred, doesn't count. Fracture of any bone, except for simple things like your fingers, toes, and nose, severe hemorrhages, any internal organ injury, and then second or third degree burns affecting more than 5% of the body surface. So 5% is about your hand and your forearm. That's about 5% of your body surface. And then we're going to define substantial damage, which is just damage that adversely affects like the structural integrity of the airplane, and it requires a major repair or replacement of a component. And then there's a list of exceptions. So bent fairings or cowlings, dents or punctures in the skin, that could happen with like a minor bird strike, like a little bird on the leading edge wing. If it's minor and it doesn't affect the aerodynamics of the plane, then it's not a major repair or replacement. And then damage to landing gear, wheels, tires, brakes, wingtips, or flaps if they do not compromise airworthiness. So if something were to happen and you're not entirely sure if it compromises the airworthiness, talk to a mechanic. Some major repair examples. I'm not going to read this to you. I just wanted to include it so you kind of had an idea of what counted as a major repair. Essentially, any type of overhauling of engine components is a major repair. If you're replacing an entire wing, that would be a major repair. Anything like control surfaces that affect aerodynamics. If you're, I don't know, if you extended flaps too early and the flap flew off, that would count as a major repair. So again, this will be sent to you so that you can kind of just review this. All right, so these are incidents now that require immediate notification. So an incident simply is an occurrence other than an aircraft accident associated with the operation of an aircraft, which affects or could affect the safety of operations. So anything that's not an accident is an incident. There is a chat. I'm going to look at that really quick. Is there an FAA publication that lists these? Which one are we talking about? Were we talking about the major repair?
Yeah, sorry, that's what I was talking
Okay,
about.
no, that's okay. Yes, I will. I'll find the link and post it in this chat once we're done with this.
Thank you.
Yeah, because that's where I got it from. Okay, cool. So incidents that require immediate reporting: flight control system failure, in-flight fire, mid-air collision, crew incapacitation. So like, for example, if you're flying with your CFI and your CFI passes out and you're a student pilot that's not allowed to solo yet, that would be crew incapacitation. That would require immediate reporting. Loss of over 50% of your EFIS or PFD. So EFIS is electronic flight instrument system and primary flight display. So if you're flying like a technologically advanced aircraft, that's where you would find that. If you fly with Girls Love to Fly, like the Cessna 150, we have a GPS, but we don't have an EFIS or a PFD, so that's not relevant for us. If you're flying like a 172 with the G1000, that has a PFD. Fuel exhaustion. So if you did poor pre-flight planning and you run out of fuel, gotta report that. Damage exceeding $25,000 or an overdue aircraft. So if you filed like a VFR flight plan and maybe you don't arrive at your destination within 30 minutes of your ETA, and maybe you were on a flight following and you did a Mayday call, but then ATC couldn't get a hold of you after that, you'd be considered an overdue aircraft that was believed to be in an accident because you declared Mayday and you didn't arrive within 30 minutes of your ETA. Questions? Again, this is definitely not something that you're going to be expected to memorize, like this entire list. You just have to know that it exists and know where to find it. So this is part 830 NTSB. A quick search on Google will present this to you. Or now you have this presentation once I send it to you guys, and you can use that as a resource too. Some examples of incidents: I talked about a bird strike earlier. If it just does like minor dents or just like a cracked windshield, but aircraft lands safely, that's an incident. And I think in like the second to last slide or so, I included a link of like where you would report certain things to the FAA, just so you have it. Hopefully you never need it. Engine failure: the engine quits, but the aircraft lands safely without any damage. Electrical system failure: hard landings, they happen. Runway incursion: essentially as long as there's like a safe outcome and no one gets hurt or dies. These are examples of incidents. So the phone or on the phone numbers, those are for NTSB reporting. There's also a form that you can do online, the 61201, and that would be within 10 days for accidents or 7 days for overdue aircraft. They want to, if you're missing, they want to know faster. So that's why the timeline is a little different. Oh, and then talking about preserving the wreckage. So if you're involved in an aircraft crash or you witness one, you don't want to touch anything because it's essentially it's like a crime scene. I'm not saying a crime was committed, but it's like a crime scene in which you don't want to move anything because they will use the layout of the crash and where all of the components landed to determine what happened. And I don't know if this show is on anymore, but there's a there's a show, or there was a show called I want to say it was like called Aircraft Disasters, or I'll have to look it up. But there's a show that used to like cover different aircraft disasters, and they would emphasize the importance of like preserving the wreckage, because it's amazing what these investigators do is they go out and they find all the components of the crash, and they're just like, well, the tail, was found however many miles away, or like where everything landed, they can determine like what kind of failure it was, if it was like a mechanical failure. They can tell like if the flaps were extended and things like that, the landing gear was extended. It's crazy. It's kind of like, it's almost like they're doing a like an autopsy of the plane to determine what happened. And so if you have to, obviously if you have to like save someone and like pull them out of the wreckage, you can do that. It just talks about no movement unless needed for safety. So if you need to help someone out, yeah, you can do that, but otherwise try not to touch the wreckage. And then FAA reports, that's just the link that talks about the different things that you can report. And I was gonna look at it so you guys can see it. So reporting safety issues. So like, we'll get into this in the next slide, but the FAA hotline. So if you witness someone doing something unsafe at any time, you can report that person and their phone number to the FAA hotline. There's a phone number too, but the online form is a little bit easier. So there's an online form that you can fill out. And I personally have used this for an unsafe situation that happened in the traffic pattern at an airport that I won't disclose. And somebody from the Sacramento FSDO, the Flight Standards District Office, actually contacted me maybe like a month or a month and a half later, saying that they were going to pursue, I don't want to say the case, but like they were going to investigate what happened, and they were going to contact that pilot and offer, but like it's not a voluntary offer, it's like a mandatory offer, remedial training for that, just because that pilot was doing some unsafe operations into an airport, and it caused like it was like they were cutting people off. They were entering, it's a left traffic pattern. They entered on a right base and they were coming at me and my student. When we were on left base, they came on a right base. It was a whole thing. So I reported it because it was unsafe. And someone from the FSDO contacted me. They managed to get a hold of that pilot and offer remedial training. And then they called me back after that whole process, and they were like, he was actually super responsive and received everything very well. And everything they seem like, they're gonna do better, and they're gonna try harder to be safer. And I can say, because I see that pilot flying around, I can say like it's true, and they have changed their ways. So I don't know if I'm just like giving a personal plug for the FAA hotline, but I'm just saying, hey, it worked out and it went well. Other links: reporting a bird strike, reporting a laser incident. Like if you're not supposed to shine lasers at airplanes, if that happens to you, you can report it. If you can also tell ATC if you're on like a flight following, like, hey, someone's shining a laser up at us, and you can get like an approximate location. They will send the police department over there. Reporting an accident to the National Transportation Safety Board. So there's that too. Malfunctions or defects. So this is like a one-stop shop for all your links. I've included it in the presentation. And then I'm not going to do presentation mode because I'm going to get out of this again. But here's something called NASA reports. We're literally talking about NASA, like space NASA. So a NASA report is a voluntary confidential report that pilots and aviation personnel can submit when they make a mistake or experience a safety-related issue during flight operations. It is managed by NASA on behalf of the FAA. So when I say it's managed by NASA, I mean it's on purpose. So the FAA essentially wanted to bring in like a third-party an objective third party, to where pilots could admit voluntarily if they made a mistake on accident, and not be like penalized for it. So if like you unintentionally violate an FAA regulation, like I don't know, like an airspace violation or an altitude deviation, and it was unintentional, you can submit the NASA report, and it could prevent enforcement action, again, as long as the mistake wasn't intentional or like part of an accident. And what's great about it, first of all, one, it's confidential, and two is it actually just like enhances aviation safety, and everybody, I don't want to say everybody does it, but every different type of pilot submits it. So you can go on the NASA report website, and commercial airline pilots do NASA reports, military pilots do NASA reports, helicopter pilots, like every type of pilot submits can submit a NASA report, and you can read them online. It's confidential. You won't see like the person's name or the tail number, but you can just read about, different mistakes that pilots made and what they intend to do to learn from it. And in the case that maybe you did some violation on accident and you fill out a NASA report, well, let's say someone saw you do that and they reported you to the FAA, and the FAA decides to pursue it, they will see that you submit a NASA report, and it'll look a lot better on you than if you were reported and you did not submit a NASA report. Because ultimately, by submitting the report, you're acknowledging, hey, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I won't do it again. Here's how I'm going to learn from it and prevent that from happening again. So by doing that, the FAA is like, okay, this person's learning, yeah, they screwed up, but they are acknowledging that mistake was made. And the whole goal is to like encourage learning and not punishment. So we're trying to improve pilot decision making and promote like a non-punitive reporting culture in a way that doesn't punish you, but it encourages you to be honest and to teach other pilots to help learn from your mistake as well. And I'll show you what the website looks like. So here's it's the Aviation Safety Reporting System, ASARS. So you'll hear it, people will say, oh, file a NASA report or file an ASAR report, the same thing. So you'd go to like a general report form for pilots, but ATC have them, mechanics, cabin crew, drone pilots have them. So you would click general report form, and then it just is like, please read the following. When you submit this, you'll receive like a letter from NASA in the mail, which when I lived with my parents, and I filed a NASA report one time, and they were like, NASA's contacting you. So it's just funny. You're gonna get a strip of paper in the mail, and it's just gonna have like called an identity strip. It just has like a long code on it, just letting you know, hey, NASA received your NASA report. Thanks. They also send you like a brochure or something. But yeah, so it just kind of talks about like what the NASA report is, and it says that the Federal Aviation Regulation 91-25 prohibits reports filed with NASA from being used for FAA enforcement purposes. This report will not be made available to the FAA for civil penalty or certificate actions for violations of the Federal Aviation Regulations. So it's saying like, hey, we're not going to tell on you, but we're just trying to encourage pilots to use this form and to not be afraid to use this form, because I know pilots that are afraid to use it, and you shouldn't be. So anyway, you can continue to report. I'm not actually going to fill it out. I'm just showing you the form. So here's like the information you would enter, like your phone number, hours that you can be contacted at. You don't have to fill that out, but like your name, type of event or situation. You could say like airspace violation, altitude deviation, or something. The date of occurrence and the local time. Approximately, if you remember. You wouldn't be captain or first officer, you'd be pilot flying or pilot not flying. And then, if it's just you, it'd be single pilot. If it was me, I'd say instructor. Total time flying in hours, last 90 days, time and type of the airplane that it occurred in. So like if you're in a Cessna 172, how many hours do you have in that 172? Select your certificates right here. ATC experience, you wouldn't, unless you have ATC experience, any of you, but you wouldn't fill that out otherwise. what airspace you were in. Select the condition for the weather, visibility, ATC advisory services. You know, if you were on flight following, then you would put that. It'd be I mean, if you're with NorCal approach, it'd be TRACON, and then you could just do NorCal approach in the facility name. Oh, there's a bug. I'm sorry. Your aircraft type, you'd be Part 91. Personal mission, I think it'd be flight training, flight plan if you were on one, otherwise none. Flight phase, taxi, parked, takeoff. I don't know how anything would happen if you're parked, but anyway. Climb, cruise, all of that. Route in use, you know, if you're going from McClellan to Lincoln direct then. Not required for you to fill out though. If there's an additional aircraft, you can add that aircraft. I'm sorry, there's this bug is like just following me. Altitude and such. And then here's where you would describe the event situation and be, you know, just include what you think is relevant and important. Include what you believe really caused to be the problem and what can be done to prevent a reoccurrence or correct the situation. That part is important because they want to see that you intend to learn from this. And here's kind of like your chain of events that you can follow to help you describe the event is how the problem arose, contributing factors, how it was discovered, and corrective actions. And then they want you to consider, you know, your decisions, your judgments, factors affecting the quality of human performance, you know, maybe you didn't get that much sleep that night, things like that, actions or inactions. You would submit the report and then you would wait a couple weeks to get that identity strip in the mail just to confirm that you did indeed submit the report. But I highly recommend using this if anything happens that you're like, I think I broke regulation, I'm not sure, but I'm nervous and I'm scared. I would recommend using this because in the case that someone tries to use that situation against you, the FAA can't use it because you filled out a NASA report. As long as it was unintentional. I need to emphasize that. It's a great system, I think, and I don't think enough people use it or even know about it. So I want to make sure that you guys all know about it because, you know, not everything is bad. Sometimes you just need to learn from your mistakes. And then I was going to show you, just for fun, how you can look up. You can look up and just read them for fun, different NASA reports that people filled out. So database online, start your search. I don't have a report number, but let's just say I want to specify Part 91. The event type was, let's see, airspace violation, because that's what I keep talking about. But we'll also say deviation from altitude. Oh, that didn't pick up anything. That's okay. I don't know why that's not working. Let's just try it. Of course it wasn't. Okay, this is going great. Let's see, contributing factors. Let's play with that. I'll try this again. Oh, that's my bad. That's why it didn't work. Okay. I haven't done this in a while. Let's say aircraft, just to see what we get. I don't know if this is going to work. Maybe that doesn't. Oh, there we go. Taking a little bit. Okay. Here's an example. This is the like the report number. And just talking about the flight conditions or VMC, daylight time. They were talking to TRACON and they what's it called? They censored out the TRACON facility because it's confidential. So even though this is public, they're not gonna like give your name or your area. Airspace Class E, they didn't put the airport. This is IFR. Oh, we're talking about skydiving. Their TCAS, traffic collision avoidance system, malfunctioned. And then the reporters, corporate, first officer, pilot flying, multi-engine. They have their ATP rating. They have 5,400 hours. My dog wants to come inside. Give me 1 second. They had a communication breakdown as one of their human factors. And then here's the narrative. So you can literally read through this whole thing. And I'm not asking you to read it. I'm not going to read it to you. But this is just an amazing resource, I think, to just go through, see what mistakes other people have made, see what they've done to correct for it, and see how you can learn from it as well. So I think using the NASA report database is a great idea and a great tool. And that is all I had on all of those topics. So yeah, hopefully this was interesting enough, because I know it's not a super interesting topic, but hopefully helpful, and will give you some sort of reference to what regulations to at least start off with. I'm not saying that the regulations I listed are the only ones you should be looking into. There's definitely other ones, but those are the ones that I say, hey, start off with these, get familiar with these, and then, as you progress in your training, talk with your CFI, dive into other ones. The NTSB stuff's kind of a lot, kind of confusing. Just knowing where to find the information is crucial, and knowing that that information exists will help you, and help you through the check ride, help you be a safe pilot, all of that. So any questions? We have time. So is there anything that was confusing? A lot.
Is the NTSB like a book we're supposed to have, or is it all online stuff?
I mean, yes, to both, book, but also online. So I should have grabbed my Aquarium, but I have a digital one, so let me see. If any of you use ForeFlight, just so you know, you have automatically a copy of the Federal Aviation Regulations in your documents. So if you don't want to buy the book, it is already on your ForeFlight. So let me look it up for you. It'll be in your FARs though, to answer your question completely. It's just how we talk about Part 91, Part 121, just another part. Part 830 has to do with NTSB. But you can find it online too. Which I kind of find it, sometimes I find using the online version of the FARs and any part of the FARs more helpful, because like they link to, because sometimes when you're reading the regulations, it'll be like, except as stated in this regulation in this paragraph, and then you can just go click on it versus like flipping through the book and doing that. So online would be great. And then let me find that publication list of I think it was the major repairs. I think it's Part 43, but I just want to make sure I'm saying it right. Yes. So I'm going to type it in this chat. And then let me find the link too, because I was on my iPad looking at that. Part 43, though. Also talks about preventive maintenance as well. So like maintenance that you're allowed to as a pilot to do. I want to find the specific list for Appendix A. There it is. I will put it here in the chat, just so you have it. And then while we're all here, and sometimes you'll see it written like 14 CFR, I don't know, part 91. CFR is the Code of Federal Regulations, and the FARs are within the Code of Federal Regulations, so that's what the CFR stands for. And then here's the part 830. Oops, for, oh my gosh, my mouse is getting confused as to what window I'm in. I don't think this was working. Let me get out of that. And let me try this. There we go. Sorry, I'm having technical issues. Okay, so there's your part 830, and then above that is the part 43 for maintenance related. So save those, get familiar with those. Again, not saying you have to memorize these entire lists, but know where to find these items. And yeah, I would love to send this to anybody that would like it. If you want to give me your email in the chat, just so you have the presentation. I'll include my notes too. It's like I put some notes in there for you. So if you want to put your email in the chat, I will email it to you. And then of course this session was recorded and we'll be posting it to the YouTube for on Girls Love to Fly, as we always do. But yeah, if anyone doesn't have any other questions.
Thanks, Megan. It's
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, and this stuff is always good to read.
Yeah.
It's just pick up your iPad if you got it saved on there and just read. You learn so much. I know, like when I go back in there and just start reading the regs, I'm like, oh yeah, it's just it's
Mhm.
fun to read. It's dorky as it sounds. It's just fun to continuously read through them, even though sometimes it may not make sense. And if it doesn't, you could always go on ChatGPT or internet and try to make sense
Sure.
of some of it, because you might read a reg and go, what do they mean by that? Obviously, you can ask your CFI or ask another pilot what their version of that is, but you can also find out online. So like I said, if it doesn't make sense, I just copy and paste it. That's what I've done in the past, and then it can come together. Obviously, got to watch out where you're getting the information. You never know
Sure.
accurate if it's online, but sometimes that the regs just are a little bit, they're written a little bit kind of like,
Yeah.
what does that mean? So you could dig into it.
Yeah. Yeah, they're written like in a way where it's thou shalt not unless kind of thing. So it's like following the chain of thought is like, what is it trying to say? Yeah, it's a little confusing. ChatGPT is a great tool if you're familiar. Otherwise, like I know Google has their AI, so AI is helpful in that respect. But like Jamie said, you also have to know that AI makes mistakes too. So definitely confirm your information with like your CFI or with other resources that you have. But also an important note is the regulations get updated every year. So like if you're using the paper version, the FAR aim, I mean, you would technically get like a new one every year. So that's kind of why the digital one is nice, because you don't have to buy anything else, especially like on ForePlay, it just gets updated automatically. So yeah, just keeping track with the changes, because we actually had quite a few changes last year and this year. I mean, the ACS changed. Currency requirements changed for flight instructors in terms of like night currency. So that's new. There was something else I feel like that changed that I can't remember. But changes do happen, and we don't necessarily know why, but it is up to us to be familiar. The basic med changed. Basic med changed. It used to be, I think, max takeoff weight of like 6,000 pounds, and it went up to 12,500 pounds. So big things like that changed. So you want to be familiar with that. And then I think, like, if you want to be notified about stuff like that, you can, if you become a member of AOPA, they usually send out emails when there's big changes like that. I think Flying Magazine. If you join the FAA safety team, or I'm sorry, if you sign up for the FAA safety team and join the Wings program, that's a fantastic resource and it's free. So I would actually highly recommend that. Let me get a link for you guys. It's free, and what you could do is you just sign up for the Wings program, which is essentially like you get access to free webinars, free courses from the FAA, and it actually counts like you need a flight review over 24 calendar months. Your flight review could be done using the Wings program, which is great. Saves you time and money, and it's just more efficient. So let me send the link to you for that as well. And if anything, the webinars are super interesting. They're usually hosted by pilots and they're virtual, so you don't have to go anywhere. And it's just pilots talking for an hour or two on just different topics. And sometimes you have like air traffic controllers on there. You can have like aircraft mechanics on there. So many different topics to review. And again, free resource. Anything that's free, take advantage of. And there's actually a lot out there. There's a lot of free resources. So I would recommend signing up to be notified by the FAST team and doing the Wings program and just looking at the courses available there. I'm part of the Wings program. I've done a few courses and I've always learned something. So highly recommend. All right, you guys. Well, that was all I had. So thanks for joining. Thanks for being a member. When I email you, you'll have my email. So feel free, to reach out if you have any questions, or if you're not flight training with us and you want to get started on that, happy to help you with that too.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good night.
All right, y'all. Good night.